Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Friday Night Live. Yeah, I think probably weekly might be a bit too much for these, so I'm going to cut back to fortnightly or even monthly. I'll see how it goes. Also, I might try a different way of doing it. I might try and do it either live into YouTube or on Instagram, because I think it makes it slightly easier to see comments, so I can answer questions live rather than have to get them beforehand and then sort of read them out. But anyway, I'll give it some thought. I'll post to the group anyway when I've made a decision. If anyone's got any thoughts, please do let me know. I'll crack straight on with the questions then. If you have the occasional drink or two, maybe 3 or 4 times a year on family occasions, etc., because most others are drinking, and you definitely don't let that change your normal abstinence, then what's the problem? Okay, so there's quite a lot to say on this one. Firstly, I suppose a good place as any to start is a conceptual one, because abstinence means not drinking. And what you're describing there is drinking. So I would swap the question around and say, how can drinking not change your usual abstinence? Because you're not abstinent if you're drinking. Also, I mean, the language is interesting, isn't it? Occasional drink or two, maybe 3 or 4 times a year. It's all very vague, isn't it? And of course, it just doesn't work that way. Another point I think is interesting is, so you're suggesting you would do this because most others are drinking. And you say maybe 3 or 4 times a year. I don't know what your social situation is like, but for my social situation, virtually every time I'm out socializing in an evening, and usually an afternoon as well event, if it's on a weekend, most other people are drinking. I don't think I socialize that much, to be honest, probably less than most people. But I'd be very surprised if you only found yourself in a situation when most other people are drinking 3 or 4 times a year. I would think if your criteria is I will drink when most other people are drinking, you will probably end up drinking virtually every week at least. There's all of those issues. What you're really suggesting there is like a form of moderation. So let's do another deep dive into moderation and see what the problems are with it. Okay, so firstly, alcohol is a sedative, and your brain reacts to it by becoming hypersensitive. I talk about this all the time, but I really don't think you can say it too much, to be honest. Your brain works by way of releasing its own massive array of chemicals, drugs, and hormones. It creates and excretes them. Lots of these you would have heard of, things like adrenaline and cortisol and endorphins and dopamine, all these chemicals and drugs that your brain creates and releases. And it works by way of something called homeostasis, which is a balance. So when you interrupt that balance, your brain takes steps to counter it. And it does this in lots of different ways. It releases things like cortisol and adrenaline, which are stimulants which counteract the sedating effects of the alcohol. So when the alcohol wears off, there is an unpleasant feeling. Okay, it's equivalent to drinking too much caffeine when you feel very uptight, very unpleasant, a bit anxious. It's why you wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning when you've been drinking. It's the withdrawal. A lot of people struggle with that. Well, only, chronic alcohol dependent people get withdrawal. Of course they don't. Like anything in life, it's a matter of degrees. If you're drinking 3 or 4 bottles of spirits a day and have been for a decade, then yes, you will get extreme withdrawal, even life-threatening. But every time someone drinks, they get alcohol withdrawal. My definition of withdrawal is it's an unpleasant feeling caused by a chemical imbalance, which is itself caused by the previous dose of the drug, in this case, alcohol. There's 2 ways to get rid of that unpleasant feeling that you get when a drink wears off. One is to wait a few days for your brain chemistry to get back to normal. But the far quicker way is to just take another drink, because in taking another drink, you're correcting that chemical imbalance. Your brain is geared up to work under the sedating effect of the alcohol, but the alcohol's not there. So it's completely overreacting. It's in a state. So when you take alcohol again, you correct that chemical imbalance. Now, the withdrawal in and of itself doesn't make addiction. Otherwise, everybody would be addicted to alcohol the first time they took it. There's another part of your brain that jumps in here called the subconscious. Now, the subconscious is an automated reaction to things. So if you do the same thing over and over again with the same result, your brain will start triggering it automatically when it perceives that result is required. Okay, and the example I give in the book is driving. So if you're a driver and you are in a car as a passenger and the car's going too fast or too close to the vehicle in front, you'll feel your right leg keep tensing. It's called air braking. Okay, there's no reason for it. There's no brake on the passenger side, but your brain has learned through however many decades you've been driving for that when you extend your right leg, it slows the vehicle down. So when you perceive you're driving too fast, too close to the vehicle in front, your brain engages that automated reaction. Now, the subconscious is a subconscious. It learns by cause and effect. And what it learns when you drink regularly over many years and even decades is that there's an unpleasant feeling that kicks in when one alcoholic drink wears off, and that can be relieved by taking the next drink. Okay, it's learned behavior, that. And when you learn that, you can never unlearn it. So, forever after, when you hit that stage, every time one drink wears off, your brain interprets that unpleasant feeling as I want another drink. So that's what people mean when they say I don't have an off switch. What they really mean is my brain has learned at a very basic subconscious level that that unpleasant feeling that kicks in when one alcoholic drink wears off can be corrected by another one. And in that way, every drink creates the desire for the next one. With that in mind, how on earth are you going to have a drink or two? Okay, assuming you've overstepped that mark already, how are you going to have a drink or two? You say, what's the problem? Well, the problem is this: when you've had your drink or two, you will want another one, and you will want it far more than you had the first one, because not only do you have all the reasons that you wanted the first one, but you've now got that unpleasant feeling kicking in saying that you want another one. There's another issue here, and that's craving. So craving is a conscious thought process whereby we fantasize two parts to it. Well, in fact, there's more than that. I go into quite a lot of detail in, I think, Alcohol Explained too about this, but let's keep it simple. There's two main parts to craving. One is fantasizing. So sitting there thinking about how nice it would be to have a drink, how good it would taste, how good it would make you feel. And the other part of it is teasing yourself with the possibility of having one. So starting, that's when you enter the thought process of thinking, I could have one on just this one occasion. Okay. When you allow yourself to drink any amount of alcohol, no matter on what occasion, you are more likely to crave, because you are more likely to start thinking, can I have one on this occasion? It's, there's people here drinking, I've allowed myself to do it in this or this occasion. Should I drink? Shouldn't I drink? How would it feel? Can I have one? And when you go into that thought process, you are craving. Okay, you're not paying attention to anything that's going on around you. You're just taken up in this unpleasant internal debate. Two ways of ending that debate. Well, in fact, one simple way of ending that debate, and that's to take a drink, because you won't be fantasizing about something and obsessing about whether or not to have one if you're drinking it. That happens when you allow any amount of alcohol into your life. Okay, and that's the key. People often talk about triggers. Trigger is something that puts the thought of a drink into your head. The craving is what you do with that thought. If you start fantasizing and considering the possibility of having one, you will be craving. Okay, I think about alcohol because of what I do, probably 70% of my waking hours, and yet I never ever crave a drink, because I think of alcohol on an academic level. I never sit there and think, oh, I really want a drink. Shouldn't I have one? Okay. If you allow yourself at any point, I will drink alcohol on this or this occasion, you have let alcohol back into your life, and you will find you start craving it more and more because it's always there as a possibility. Okay. Think of stopping drinking like building a dam, right? You've got a dam and you've got 100 billion gallons of water behind it. When you're talking about moderation, you're talking about putting a hole in the dam to allow just a trickle of water through. Okay, but the problem is if you put a hole in a dam, you undermine it structurally and the whole thing comes crashing down. Maybe not immediately, but that's what will happen. Okay, dams are big, solid, heavy things, and they don't have massive holes in them or even small holes in them for a reason. It weakens them structurally. Okay, and that's what you're doing. You've built this massive wall, and trying to have one or two here or there is like putting a hole in it and structurally weakening it. Um, I would go out on a limb here, um, and suggest that whoever posted this hasn't read either of the books, probably not gone onto the website to have a look at the first 5 chapters and not done the course, because I do deal with this in quite a lot of detail. All the physiological, chemical, and psychological and subconscious reasons why moderating is inherently difficult. And the other thing I would say is it's not what you think it is. Okay. Because when we think about moderating, this is what you're thinking here. And you can tell by the wording of the question that 3 or 4 times a year when you're out with the family and there's a load of people all there drinking, I'll just have one or two, really nonchalant and relaxed and pleasant. You'll have one, you'll sip it, you may forget about it, you'll put it down, you probably won't bother with another one. You might do, but it will just be the second one and then you'll completely forget about it. That's what you're thinking about moderation. Okay. That is not the reality of it. Okay. The reality of it is going to this function, really wanting a drink, craving it, having one. It's going to go far too quickly. It's not going to do what you think it will. You won't be relaxed and happy because you'll be thinking about the next drink. And you'll be craving the next one as much as you crave the first one. And then if you have your second one, that will disappear in no time and you will desperately want another one, even more than you wanted the first one. And you will spend the entire event obsessing about alcohol. You'll either have another one and another and another and end up hammered, which is exactly presumably why you want to stop in the first place, or you'll spend the rest of the time there feeling pretty miserable because you can't drink, and you will also have that unpleasant, tense feeling inside of you because of it. That's the reality of moderation. You may be able to make that work. 3 or 4 times a year, you may have one or two drinks. Okay, but I guarantee you won't enjoy them and you won't enjoy the rest of the event without it. There's only one way. When you hit that problem with alcohol, you've got a choice. You either go to events and get completely hammered, you go and have one or two and be very, very miserable there, or you get rid of alcohol, you change your perception of it, you stop wanting it, and you kick it into touch and don't have it again. And then you go out and you can enjoy these family functions. So as I say, hazarding a guess that maybe whoever's written this hasn't actually read the books, but I'm glad you posted the question actually, because I think it's a good reminder about all the reasons why this just doesn't work. And frankly, if it did, then there would be no need for my book, because if it was possible for people to just backtrack, I wouldn't have sold a single copy of my book. Do we really need support groups, or can we just rely on the literature, or is it all just to each his, her own? I think it is to each their own. Okay, but I would caveat that by saying when I stopped drinking, I thought it was enough just to rely on, I'll call it the literature, but it was the knowledge, the change of perception about drinking. Okay, I thought that was good enough. And it was for quite a long time. I would go out, I'd socialize, I'd do bits and pieces, and that was it. But what I learned almost by accident as a side thing of doing this is I started to meet people, as you would expect, who don't drink. And I've become very close friends with quite a few of them. And it's a kind of friendship that I haven't experienced in quite a few years, because we have something quite key in common, but also I'm able to socialize with them without them drinking, which is key because drunk people are phenomenally irritating. Okay. Forget whether these people have a drink problem or they have a right, just because it's my problem, they should be able to blah, blah, blah. Forget all that. Drunk people are horrendously irritating. And if you are sober, they are not nice to talk to. So it's really pleasant to be able to socialize with people one, who get what you're doing and don't look at you like you've just told them that, I don't know, you've sawn your own legs off for fun when you tell them you don't drink. um, and people that don't, that they're not continually getting intoxicated, so you can talk to them for a few hours without them starting to smell and their eyes glazing and them standing too close to you and spitting on you when you talk. It's absolutely disgusting. And the only reason people get away with it is because everyone else is doing it. So that would be my one caveat: to each their own, but don't underestimate how powerful it can be to make friends who get what you're doing, who understand it. And also, it is nice to have a tribe, your people. You know, if you go out on a social event and everyone's drinking, it can feel a bit like you're on the outside. Because let me put it another way: if you're really, really hungry and you're going out for dinner with a big group of people and they all sit there around the table eating and enjoying themselves, and you can't, you're going to feel really unhappy and excluded. That kind of dynamic applies not to every situation, because a lot of times, you know, people might go out, like I went out for a work do the other day and we played darts. But you know, there's focus around the dartboard, not around the alcohol. You might go out with people for a meal, and you're talking rather than. But other times you go out with people and they're going out to drink. And if they are going out to drink, you are excluded from that activity, and it doesn't feel particularly nice. Um, Having people there who are your tribe can be really powerful, because you can start to feel like an outsider, which isn't a nice feeling for anyone. But even if you are in that situation, knowing that you've got people, that you're not the only one, that actually it's not us that are missing out, it's them. We're not the weirdos and the idiots, it's the people that are still drinking. That can be massively powerful as well. So, you know, if you genuinely don't need like groups and support, then absolutely fine. But I think most people, even arrogant idiots like myself who thought they didn't, can find that actually it's incredibly important. um how were your first few weeks alcohol free? Did you struggle at the beginning? Do you ever miss it? My first few weeks alcohol free were not good. I drunk a ridiculous amount leading up to my stopping. The first night I didn't sleep a second. I was just lying there twitching, and literally every second on the clock I was watching. It was horrible. And that went on for quite a few days. But to such an extent, my brain was all over the place, and I can't even remember what my thought processes were. It was extremely confusing. Um, so I struggled at the beginning, but not because I'd given up alcohol, but just from getting through that physical side of it, which was quite horrendous. And also at the time, I was incredibly unhappy for various reasons, aside from well, obviously the drinking had exacerbated it, but I was in a very bad place anyway on lots of different fronts. It felt like everything was going wrong. So it wasn't a good time. And for me, the thought process wasn't, I've quit, this is fantastic, I can, you know, go do all these wonderful things. It was, my life is abysmal, it's really really bad. But actually I finally accepted that alcohol is just making it worse and worse and worse, and I can't keep going like this, or something very bad is going to happen. So I wasn't expecting it to be particularly fun anyway. Sorry, let me just put that do not disturb on. So it was quite horrible. But I didn't struggle in that I wanted a drink. And I think because I had hit a place, and people kind of call it a rock bottom. It wasn't a rock bottom in that I didn't lose my job or my home or anything, but I think emotionally I was pretty low. And I just knew I couldn't keep doing what I was doing with alcohol, that it was just, I couldn't do it. It was no longer going to happen. So I had that certainty. And I think for that reason, again, I've just talked about cravings. I didn't sit there craving a drink because I wasn't going to have one. You know, the first weekend that came along, and it would have, you know, ordinarily I would have been drinking. I didn't sit there craving it because I wasn't going to drink. I just wasn't going to do it. And that's why that certainty is so important, and why moderating is so destructive, because you destroy that certainty, you completely wipe it out. Again, it's like putting that structural damage into that dam, and it's just a matter of time before it all comes crashing down again. Do I ever miss it? No, not at all. I think, and this is a key point, you need to recognize that you will miss the idea of it, not the reality. Okay. What you will miss is, oh, that lovely glass of champagne on Christmas morning, or, a glass of mulled wine when it's freezing cold, or going on holiday and having a nice cold beer. That's the fantasy. It's not the reality. Okay, the reality of it is something very, very different. Most of your drinks aren't those idyllic situations anyway. Most drinks you drink really without even being aware of them. And if you are aware of them, all they're really doing is anesthetizing an unpleasant feeling that's been caused by the previous drinks, either the actual withdrawal or the fact that, oh, it's Friday night, I should be drinking, or I'm not drinking. And then suddenly, instead of enjoying whatever you're doing, all the pleasant things you can do on Friday night, like go out with friends or have a nice meal or sit there and watch my wonderful comments, you're just in that unpleasant thought process. So having a drink in that situation will make you feel a bit better. But remember what it is. It's a sedative. It just makes you feel slightly dulled. It's like hitting yourself over the head with a brick and feeling a bit dazed. It doesn't actually increase your enjoyment in any way, shape, or form. And I think when you get to that stage, you don't miss it. You might, as I say, you might miss the fantasy of it. You might miss the idea of it. But for me, that's part of the tool. One of the main tools of stopping. It's recognizing that the thoughts you have aren't the reality. And one of the things I used to do, I didn't even do it consciously. The thing I used to hate most about drinking towards the end was when I would wake up at like 3 or 4 in the morning with my heart absolutely hammering, really anxious, really kind of exhausted, but completely unable to get back to sleep. And I think I felt it even more keenly at that point because my 2 sons were like babies. I stopped when they were like 6 months and a year or something. So they were still very little. And when you have small children, you never get enough sleep ever. And it goes on for weeks and months, and it just feels unending. It's horrible. And then waking up, knowing that you had a few precious hours to sleep and you were lying there wide awake, was even more galling. And whenever I think about drinking, that was what jumped into my mind. It was almost like when you see alcohol, your mind can either go off into a fantasy, in which case you're in trouble, or it can stick with the reality, in which case you're generally in a much better place. Okay, every time I thought of an alcoholic drink, every time I saw one, every time the drinks were being poured or being offered or whatever it was, I would immediately think waking up at 4 in the morning, because I knew it would happen to me even if I never really did have one, but on the occasions I just had one, I'd still be waking up. I used to feel as rotten after having one as I did if I had like a couple of dozen, which is one of the reasons I always drank so heavily, because I never actually felt that much worse after it anyway. But be that as it may, the fact of the matter is when you start to see it that way, sticking with the reality can be massively powerful. And if you are really at your wit's end with it, just do that. Pick the thing you hate most about drinking. Whenever you see a drink, that's the image. Make your mind go to that image. And after that, again, you don't miss it. You don't crave it. You kind of, for me, that was obviously one of the main tools of kicking it into touch. William, in general, how do you feel about counting days? For example, if someone gets to day 100, 200, or 365 that then has a glass, do you advocate they start counting back at the dreaded day 1, or should we just not count days anyway? I can see counting as both empowering and disempowering. I don't recall this being addressed in Alcohol Explained 1 or 2, thanks. So it isn't addressed in either of them. I'm horribly pedantic with things. And I would say, what are you counting? Because if you're counting consecutive days alcohol free and you have a drink, you have to go back to day 1 because you haven't had that many days alcohol free that are consecutive. However, if you're counting alcohol free days, but they don't have to be consecutive, you're just doing an average, then you can ignore it and just keep counting. So it really is up to you and what you do. The problem with the latter, which is kind of doing an average, is you're not really getting to the root of the problem. Which is the root of the problem is we want to drink, and we may drink too much. It may be bad for us, and it may make us feel awful and tired and lethargic and cause arguments and all the rest of those good things that comes with drinking. But the problem is we still think we need it. We start to think, yeah, but how can I go on holiday and not drink? How can I have Christmas and not drink? How can I socialize and not drink? What it really comes down to is life will never be quite the same without alcohol in it. And to quit drinking successfully, you need to change that. And I don't believe you do that by sort of trying to cut back a bit, but I can't quite stop, so I'll just drink on this, and this occasion. It's just a form of moderation. If you decide to stop, okay, if you've been drinking 20 years, right, and you decide to stop and you go 100 days, 3 months without alcohol, and then you drink again, you are not in the same position you were when you first stopped, because in those 3 months, if you've gone about it the right way, you will have socialized without alcohol. You would have done a lot of evenings going home and relaxing without alcohol. You would have done, maybe meals not drinking, depending on what time of year. You may have Christmas, New Year, a holiday, a weekend away all under your belt. You will have done it without drinking, and you will have started to realize that, you know what, I don't need this thing in my life to enjoy myself. So you won't be at the same place you would have been. You'll be far better off than had you not stopped at all. But equally, that kind of thinking can be very destructive, because, as I've already talked about, certainty is key. Okay. And if you start this thing allowing yourself to have slip ups, you haven't got that certainty, and you're more likely to have those slip ups. So I think you can do what suits you, but you cannot go into this thinking it's all right if I slip up, because you virtually guarantee that you will, because you're allowing yourself to fail. And that's why I have mixed feelings when people relapse and you get posts there saying, oh, I'm a failure, blah, blah, blah. Because on the one hand, there's no point beating yourself up. As I say, I'm quite pragmatic. It's done. You need to learn from it and move on. But equally, there's no point saying it's fine, don't worry about it, because if you let people off the hook completely, they're just going to do it again and again and again. You need to have that certainty, and you need to perceive it as failure, because it is failure. There's no, again, it's just a simple language thing. If my goal is to stop drinking and I drink, I have failed to stop drinking. It's as simple as that. It's not up for grabs. It's not a matter of opinion. It's just what it is. But I think what you've said there at the end is the key. You can see counting as both empowering and disempowering. There's two ways of doing it. If you are literally limping from day to day, craving, miserable, not going out, not facing any situation where there's alcohol, and just adding days up in the hope that when you hit a magic number, you suddenly won't want to drink again, then you're probably in trouble. Because, as I say, stopping drinking successfully is about changing your perception of it, specifically changing it for something that I can't possibly go on holiday without drink, to, oh, wow, I did go on holiday and had an amazing time. In fact, it was better than when I was drinking, because instead of just drinking all the time, I actually did some stuff and really enjoyed it. So it's changing that perception. So I think counting days and celebrating it is great, but kind of limping along in the hopes that just clocking days up will solve the problem is probably a mistake. Having said that, I will caveat that, because a lot of it is experience. It's like anything, like lawyers, soldiers, whatever. The more experience you've got, the more years you've got behind you, generally the better you are at what you do. If you're going on your first social event, having not sober, without having gone on a social event without drinks, so incredibly confusing. If you've been drinking for 20 years and you're about to go on your very first sober social event, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be new. You're going to have to get all your tools ready. It's going to be, you're going to be consciously not drinking, but then you'll do it. If you do it in the right way, you'll think, you know what, I did quite enjoy that. And then the next time, slightly easier and slightly easier and slightly easier. And it becomes easier to say no. And it just becomes your new norm. So time does help, but only if you've got the right building blocks in to start with. It's like everything, you go to college, university, whatever it is, and you learn, and then you get the job and you actually do the job and you become better at it through that way. And that's how I see it. Your quit lit is one part. That's where you get the knowledge, the tools, the perception that you need to launch yourself. But then you build on that for however many years you're not drinking for. And you do get better and better at it. So I would say, I think I completely agree with what you're saying. I think providing it's being used as a celebration, I've done 7 days, it's my first week, it's my first month, whatever it is, then that's great. You should be celebrating it because it is something to celebrate. Massively improving your life is a cause for celebration. And you should be proud of it. So I think that is the difference. You can't just add days up and expect things. They will get slightly better because the more sober time you get, the better it will get. But it kind of doing it without that preparation, certainly for me, it's probably not the best way of doing it. It's the equivalent of, do you want to go into a new job, like quite a complicated job that requires a lot of background knowledge, having never done anything and having no idea about it, or having done a bit of background research so you understand the basics of what you need to do? You're clearly in a better position because you can hit the ground running a bit if you've got that background information. Quick question. I know you have spoken before about partner still drinking, but wondering if it's still best for me to remain quiet or let him carry on drinking night after night while I am now day 31 alcohol free. Congratulations, having spoken about that. That's a month. That's absolutely fantastic. It's getting on my nerves. I'm counting his drinks. He said he will read Alcohol Explained sometime, but right now he says he works hard and deserves a drink. So my point is, without this group and my books, I have zero support. What's your advice with that? Well, you don't have zero support if you've got the group. And there's, the group's quite big now, but there's other smaller bespoke groups you can go into where you can like make direct friends with people, even groups I don't know where you are, but in, Dawn's Soberfish group is a classic one. It's nice and small, so you actually get to know people. We've got Club Soda. I don't know if you're in London, but they do sober meetups, and in fact more and more people are doing that now, so you can try and get some sober friends. But the fact of the matter is, when you see two things, when you see through the nonsense and start to see it for what it really is, it can be incredibly frustrating to see other people continuing to bang their head against that particular brick wall. And also, it's not attractive. That James Bondy type image of drinking is just so false. It's ridiculous. When people drink, the first thing you notice is their eyes starting to glaze, which is just never attractive, because one of the most attractive things with people is bright eyes. When their eyes start to dull, it isn't nice. And they start to smell and they're becoming really irritating. It's just not an attractive look at all. And it must be difficult to be with someone who is regularly doing that. It is difficult because if you both drink and to a degree your relationship is based on drinking, then when you remove the alcohol, it either goes one or two ways. You find new interests or you don't. And it really is that simple. I think I might do a live more dedicated to this. Stacey, who wrote the workbook with me and worked on the course, was in exactly this situation for quite some time. So I think I might actually get her on to do a live and talk about this, because she's got far more good advice on that than I do, I think. But my advice is, obviously, you work hard, and that's what I used to think. You work hard, so you deserve to be, to comatose yourself and then feel dreadful for it. It's an extraordinary thought process, isn't it? It really is. Keep sort of plodding on, hitting him over the head with the book, and hopefully he gets around to reading it at some point. But no, it's not easy, unfortunately, and it's one of the more difficult things to talk about, because obviously I'm not good with relationships at all. Probably completely the wrong person to get to talk about that. I have a question. So I'm going on 2 years sober soon, and fantastic. And one of the benefits that people tout is having more energy. I've always been kind of sleepy person, and I equate energy with a speedy, over-caffeinated feeling. I have a feeling that's not right. What does having energy feel like? Side note, after quitting drinking, I was able to identify certain sleep issues like sleep apnea and a deviated septum keeping me from breathing properly at night, in the process of fixing it up. We might find when that's fixed up, you do sleep an awful lot better. So energy, equate energy with a speedy, over-caffeinated feeling. That isn't the feeling of energy. That's not a particularly pleasant feeling. Feeling of having energy is just not really being aware of your body, and feeling light, and just, being able to do stuff without it being painful, like going for walks or runs, or just, as I say, feeling light and positive. If you equate energy with a speedy, over-caffeinated feeling, you're clearly drinking too much caffeine. And I would definitely look at that, because if you are in the situation where you wake up and drink loads of coffee in the morning, for example, what will happen is it's a stimulant. So it's kind of a similar but opposite dynamic with alcohol. So if every time you wake up you drink loads of caffeine, your brain stops pumping adrenaline and all the good stuff that wakes you up in the morning, and just relies on the caffeine. So as soon as the caffeine wears off, you're utterly exhausted and you'll fall back to sleep again. So I don't know if that's an issue, but if you find yourself sleeping loads during the day, that could be the reason. So you might want to have a look at caffeine as well. In a future live, I'd like it if you could interview Professor Dame Sally Davis. In a documentary about alcohol a few years ago, she said that for women over 55, the risk of alcohol is quite low. I've looked for any updates on this and only found more support from a Dr. Doll that alcohol is actually healthy. This needs to be debunked. I can certainly debunk it. I don't think I need to have her on. I wouldn't know how to go about getting her on anyway, and I don't know that I'd necessarily feel right inviting someone on as a guest, just to sort of pull them up on something and publicly admonish them. But so alcohol is not good for you, okay? And I would challenge any human being, any organization, anyone to tell me otherwise, okay? The chemical alcohol kills living things, which is why we use it in hand sanitizer, and to clean surfaces. It's a class 1 carcinogen. So the World Health Organization puts carcinogens into different classes. Alcohol is in the top class, along with cigarette smoking and asbestos. Okay. It has zero health benefits. And as I say, I would challenge anyone to tell me otherwise. Okay. What you sometimes hear is that there's something in a particular drink that is good for you. Okay. Which is what you would expect, because, for example, wine is alcohol and grape juice, and grapes are good for us. So there will be things in wine that are good for you, but you can just eat the grapes or drink some grape juice, and then you're not taking it with a poison. Okay, I quite often liken this to, having an apple and smoking a Marlboro, and someone saying, "Well, that's really bad for you," and you go, "No, no, no. There's vitamin C in the apple." Separate them. It's ridiculous. Not only does the alcohol make the wine poisonous, but actually, if you take grapes, they're very rich in lots and lots of things that are good for you, like vitamin C. Okay, but the brewing process, the fermenting process, destroys all the vitamin C. It destroys most of the nutrients in the grape. What you're left with is a load of sugar and one or two things that survive the fermentation process. So everyone jumped, "Oh, this is really good for you." It's like, well, no, it isn't. It's bad for you because it's alcohol, and alcohol kills things. It has zero health benefits. It's that simple. There's no more to it than that. And it's, it's a nice idea, but I don't think I necessarily need anyone on the show. And I think even, the government now, certainly in the UK, the official line is no amount of alcohol is safe. No amount of alcohol is, even small, tiny amounts increase your chance of getting cancer, which is what you'd expect because it's a class 1 carcinogen. I hope that was useful for everyone. As I say, I'll see. I'm not around next week anyway for the live, but I might see about doing a slightly different format because I like the idea of maybe getting some live questions rather than getting them all pre-written. But as I say, if anyone's got any thoughts on that, do let me know. Have a good weekend, everyone, and see you soon.